The card my daughter handed me on my 71st birthday was empty. Not empty of money. I never expected money. Empty of words, just a printed poem about sunsets, and her name signed at the bottom, the way you'd sign a receipt. I sat there at the end of their long dining table in Cypress, Texas, holding that card while my son-in-law stood up and clinked his fork against a wine glass, and I remember thinking, here it comes. He's going to say something about me. It was my birthday after all. He raised his glass toward the driveway. To the new truck, he said, grinning. Y'all see it out there? Fully loaded. We earned this one. Everyone laughed and toasted and went back to their brisket. The truck sitting in that driveway had my name on the loan paperwork right next to his, because 8 months earlier he'd come to me with that easy salesman smile and said his credit was tied up in investments, and would I mind co-signing? It was just a formality. We earned this one. I set the card down next to my plate and noticed for the first time that my plate didn't match the others. Everyone else had the good china. Mine was a plastic plate from the kids' stack, the kind with the divided sections, and somebody had spooned the end of the brisket onto it. The dried-out edge piece, along with a scoop of potato salad that had clearly been scraped from the bottom of the bowl. I'd been seated at the far corner, past the grandkids, half my chair hanging off the end of the rug. A folding chair, in a dining room I helped pay for. I want to be honest with you because I've promised myself I'd tell this whole thing honestly. I didn't say a word. I was 71 years old that night, and I had spent 34 years as a charge nurse at a Houston hospital, and I had stared down trauma surgeons and grieving families, and one man who came through the ER doors with a knife still in his hand. I was not a timid woman, but at my own daughter's table, I had learned to be small. I had practiced it for years without noticing, the way you don't notice your posture going bad until one day your back simply won't straighten. My grandson noticed, though. He was 15, all elbows and quiet eyes, and he looked at my plastic plate and then at my face, and he started to open his mouth. My son-in-law reached over and squeezed the back of his neck, friendly, the way men do, and said, "Eat up, bud." And that was that. Even the children in that house had learned which things were allowed to be seen. When the cake came out, it was store-bought, and they'd gotten the name wrong. The bakery had written "Happy Birthday, Judy" in pink gel, and nobody had bothered to ask them to fix it, because nobody had looked at it long enough to care. My daughter has called me Mama her whole life. My late husband called me Jude. The only people who ever called me Judy were strangers. I drove home that night down 290 with the windows cracked, the warm September air pushing through the car, and somewhere around the beltway it hit me, not as anger, but as arithmetic. I'm a nurse. I think in vitals and dosages, and the numbers I was running in my head were these. The down payment on that house, $52,000 from Roy's life insurance. The truck loan with my name on it. The country club initiation fee my son-in-law swore he'd pay back after bonus season 3 bonus seasons ago. My grandson's hockey, which I covered every fall because things were tight. The credit card I'd added my daughter to during her maternity leave 16 years ago and somehow never removed her from. Tuition. Braces. The lake trip. The other lake trip. I had been bleeding for years, in steady drops, and they had been holding the cup. The house was dark and quiet when I got home. My little brick ranch in Spring Branch, the one Roy and I paid off in 1998. I didn't turn the TV on. I made coffee at 10 o'clock at night, which is a thing only people in crisis or people finally waking up ever do, and I sat down at the kitchen table with the accordion folder I kept in the hall closet. Roy used to tease me about that folder. He'd say, "Jude, you document everything like somebody's gonna audit your whole life." Well, somebody should have. Receipts, statements, loan papers, the cosign agreement, wire confirmations because my daughter always preferred wires. Checks felt too much like charity, she said once, and wires felt like family helping family. It was all there in my own careful handwriting and my own careful filing, 16 years of it. And when I added the big items on the back of an envelope, the number came to a little over $240,000. $240,000 and a plastic plate. But that wasn't the thing that changed me. I could have swallowed all of that. Lord help me, I probably would have. I'd been swallowing it for years. The thing that changed me was at the bottom of the stack, in the mail I'd tossed in the folder unopened that week because it looked like junk. An envelope from my own bank addressed to me that said, "Thank you for your recent home equity application. Your documents are being processed." I had not applied for anything. I sat there with that letter in my hand and the coffee going cold, and I felt the strangest sensation, like a fog burning off a field. I wasn't confused. That's what frightened me, how little confusion I felt. Some part of me had been keeping watch all along, taking notes in the dark, and now that part stepped forward and said, calmly, "They are not borrowing from you anymore. They are taking, and there's paperwork." I did not cry. I rinsed my cup, set it in the rack, and went to bed, and I lay there listening to the house settle the way Roy and I used to listen to it together. And I made a list in my head, the way I used to make lists before a 12-hour shift. By the time the ceiling went gray with morning, I knew the order of operations. I was at the bank 20 minutes before it opened. There's a particular feeling to a Texas parking lot at 7:40 in the morning, the heat already gathering, the light flat and white on the glass doors, and I stood there with my accordion folder under my arm like a woman waiting on a verdict. When the doors opened, I asked for a banker, not a teller, and they put me in a little glass office with a woman maybe 40, sharp blazer, kind eyes, the sort of person who's seen things and decided to stay gentle anyway. Her nameplate said she was a senior relationship manager. I'd met her once before, at Roy's passing, when she helped me retitle the accounts, and she remembered me, which counts for something in this world. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "what can I do for you this morning?" I put the folder on her desk and the bank's own letter on top of it. "You can start," I said, "by telling me who applied for a loan against my house." She read the letter twice. Then she pulled up my profile, and I watched her face do the thing professional faces do when they're trying not to show you what they see. She turned the screen toward me. The application was real. $68,000 against my home equity submitted online 11 days earlier, with my name typed where my name goes and a signature uploaded as a scanned image. My signature, lifted clean off something because it was mine, except I had never signed any such thing. The contact email on the application wasn't my email. The phone number wasn't my phone. "Do you recognize this email address?" she asked quietly. I did. It was my son-in-law's, the one he uses for his fantasy football league. I'll tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. It wasn't heartbreak. Heartbreak had already happened, slowly, over years of folding chairs and forgotten birthdays. What I felt was a kind of terrible relief, the relief of a diagnosis after months of symptoms. There it was on a screen, in 12-point font. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being oversensitive or difficult or dramatic about money, which is what my daughter called me, the one time I asked about repayment. I was being robbed, politely, gradually, by people who kissed my cheek at Christmas. "Flag it," I said, "whatever the word is. Fraud, dispute, freeze. I want all the words." And bless that woman. She didn't ask me if I was sure, and she didn't ask me if I wanted to think about it, and she didn't say, "But it's family." She just started typing. We were in that office almost 2 hours. The loan application, flagged, fraud affidavit started, a real one, the kind with my signature notarized right there at the bank. The credit card my daughter was still authorized on, closed, reissued, her name removed. The automatic transfers I'd set up over the years and forgotten, like leaky faucets, the hockey payment, the temporary cell phone family plan, a monthly 500 that had started during the pandemic and simply never stopped, canceled, every one. New passwords, new pins, alerts on everything. And then she paused, frowning at the screen. Mrs. Whitaker, there was a password reset request on your online banking at 6:15 this morning. It failed. Was that you? 6:15. I had been standing in my kitchen at 6:15, buttoning my blouse, looking at the letter on the table. No, I said. It was not. She added that to the file, too. When the last confirmation printed, she squared the pages, slid them into my folder, and looked at me for a moment, not as a banker. My grandmother went through something like this, she said. She waited too long. You're not waiting too long. I carried that sentence out of the bank like a prescription. The phone started a little after noon. I know now from piecing it together later exactly how it went, and I confess there's a corner of my heart that replays it like a film. My son-in-law was at a steakhouse off the Katy Freeway, entertaining 2 hospital purchasing managers. He sells surgical equipment, makes more in a year than Roy and I ever made together, which is a fact I'll come back to. And when the check came, his card declined, then his backup card declined, the backup being the one with my name on the account. Ben, because the universe occasionally has a sense of order, the third card declined too, and one of his clients had to pick up lunch. And in his business, the man holding the samples does not let the customer buy the steak. My daughter was at the nail salon. Her card was the one I'd closed at 9:40 that morning. The texts came in like weather. First confused, Mom, did the bank call you? Something's wrong with the cards. Then sharp, Mom, answer your phone. Then, from him, my son-in-law, a man who had never once texted me about anything but logistics, Judith, there has been a serious error and we need it fixed today. I had clients at lunch. This is my reputation. His reputation. His reputation. I read that one twice, standing at my counter, and then I did something I had never done in 16 years of being available the way a wall socket is available. I turned the phone face down, and I made myself a sandwich. I'm not going to pretend my hands weren't shaking a little. They were. 16 years of reflexes don't dissolve in an afternoon, and every cell in my body that had been trained to fix, to soothe, to smooth things over, was ringing like a fire alarm. But I ate my sandwich at my own table on my own good china. I got down the good china for a ham sandwich, and I do not regret it. And I let the phone buzz itself hoarse. At 2 o'clock, a different sound, one soft chime. My grandson. Grandma, are you okay? Mom and Dad are losing it. Dad's saying stuff about the bank. Are you okay, though? Are you okay, though? One person in that whole household, and he was 15 years old, and he was the only one who asked the question with me inside it. I wrote back, I'm just fine, sweetheart. Better than I've been in a while. Don't you worry about grown folks' weather. He sent back a thumbs up, and then a minute later, for the record, the birthday thing wasn't okay. The plate and stuff. I saw it. I sat down at the kitchen table and let myself cry for the first time. Just for a minute. Just enough. Not over the money. Over the fact that being seen, simply seen, by one teenage boy, felt like rain after a drought, and over what that told me about how long the drought had been. They came to the house at 5:30. I heard the truck before I saw it. That truck, the one we toasted, my co-signature riding around town on 4 new tires, and it swung into my driveway hard enough to make the trash cans jump. I watched through the shears. My son-in-law got out first, phone clamped to his ear, pacing my lawn in his sales call posture, all chest. My daughter sat in the cab for a moment with her hand over her mouth, and even through the windshield I could read her, because I'd been reading that face since the delivery room. She wasn't ashamed. Not yet. She was inconvenienced. They knocked, then they rang. Then he pounded the flat of his hand on my door and called out, We know you're in there. This is ridiculous. You're going to make us stand on the porch like strangers? Like strangers. Strangers had treated me better at the bank that morning than my family had at my own birthday dinner. I did not open the door. I want you to understand what that cost and what it bought, both. I stood in my hallway, 3 feet from people I'd give a kidney to even now, and I held still while they knocked, and it felt like holding the door of myself shut against a storm I had personally fed for 16 years. He pounded twice more. Through the door, my daughter said in a tone I'd never heard pointed at me, "This is so embarrassing, Mama." And there it was again, their North Star. Embarrassment. Never wrongdoing, never thank you, just the unbearable thought of being seen as what they were. The truck left rubber on my street when they pulled away. The next morning, I dressed in the Navy suit I saved for funerals and bank business. Same suit, and lately I'd stopped finding that funny. And I drove downtown to a law office Roy and I had used exactly twice in 40 years. The attorney was older now, mostly silver, glasses on a chain, the kind of man whose office still smells like paper. He stood when I came in and called me by my right name, and when I set the folder on his desk and said, "I need to redo my will and put my house and accounts into a trust, and I need it done correctly and soon," he didn't blink. He just took out a legal pad. We worked through it piece by piece, the house into the trust, the retirement accounts, what was left of Roy's insurance money, the CDs, a professional trustee, not a family member. I insisted on that, and every dollar earmarked for my grandson, held until he turns 25, with money released earlier only for school, my daughter and my son-in-law removed entirely. The attorney read the old will back to me before we changed it, the one from 2009 that left everything to my daughter, with love and confidence, and hearing those words out loud in that quiet office, love and confidence, I had to look out the window for a moment at the Houston skyline going on with its day. "Is this what you want?" he asked me, not as a challenge, the way a good doctor confirms before the procedure. "It's what's true," I said. "I'm just making the paperwork match the truth." He nodded, and then he did something lawyers do when they're deciding whether to tell you something. He took his glasses off. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm going to share this because you're my client and it bears on your interests. About 6 weeks ago, my office got a call from a man identifying himself as your son-in-law. He wanted to know, generally, how a family would go about obtaining guardianship over an aging parent, what doctor's letters are required, what it costs, whether it can be contested." He set the glasses on the pad. He was told this office could not advise him, but I made a note of the call, and the note has your file number on it. Guardianship. For those who don't know, and I didn't fully know, I had to have it explained to me in that office. Guardianship is when a court decides you can no longer manage your own affairs and hands your decisions, your money, your medical choices, your house, to someone else. It is for people with advanced dementia. It is for people in comas. It is not for a 71-year-old woman who balanced a hospital floor's worth of medication schedules for 3 decades and still does the Sunday crossword in pen. He hadn't been planning to borrow my life. He'd been pricing out how to take it. I signed every document that office could produce that day. With each signature, I felt less like I was losing a family and more like I was returning from somewhere. The notary stamped, the copies were made, and when I walked out into the heat, I stood on the sidewalk for a second and let it press on me like a hand on the shoulder. And I thought, all right, Jude, now, the hard part. Because paperwork is paperwork, but I still had to face them, and that evening I did. They were already at my house when I got home. My daughter's sedan this time, not the truck, which told me the truck conversation had happened somewhere along the way. She was sitting on my porch steps like she used to sit there at 16 after curfew, and he was leaning against the rail with his arms crossed, jaw working. I parked, gathered my purse, and walked up my own front walk at my own speed. "Mama," my daughter started, "you have got to tell us what is going on, because the bank is saying words like fraud." "Inside," I said, "I don't discuss family business for the neighbors." In my living room, he went first, the way he always went first. The cards, the transfers, the humiliation at lunch, the mortgage payment that was now, his word jeopardized, the hockey registration that had bounced. He has a voice built for conference rooms, and he used all of it pacing my rug, and he finished with, "You've put this family in an impossible position, and I think, honestly, we're all a little concerned about you. These are erratic decisions. People your age." "Sit down," I said. I did not raise my voice. 34 years of charge nursing teaches you that the quietest voice in the room is the one in charge of the code. He sat. 11 days ago," I said, "someone applied for a $68,000 loan against this house, with my signature scanned onto it and your email address on the paperwork. Yesterday morning at 6:15, someone tried to reset the password on my bank account. 6 weeks ago, someone called my own lawyer asking how to have me declared incompetent. I let each sentence land like a chart laid on a counter. So before you say the word erratic to me again in my own living room, you should know that the bank has a fraud affidavit with my notarized signature on it. And the only question I haven't answered yet is how far I let them take it." The room went so quiet I could hear my kitchen clock. My daughter looked at him. "And here is the detail that I'll carry to my grave." She wasn't surprised the way an innocent person is surprised. She was surprised the way a person is when something they've been not looking at gets dragged into the light. She'd known something. Not everything. I genuinely believe not everything, but a wife knows the shape of a hole even when she won't look down it. "You told me you talked to her about the loan," she said to him very slowly. "You told me Mama agreed. It was going to be repaid before she ever," he started, and then stopped because there is no good end to that sentence, and we all three knew it. And then the front door opened. My grandson came in. They'd left him in the car, which tells you everything. They brought him along and left him in the car like a gym bag. And he stood in the doorway with his backpack still on one shoulder, and he looked at his father and he said, "Tell her the rest of it." "Get back in the car," his father said. "Tell her about Galveston." The boy's voice cracked in the middle. 15 years old and shaking, but he kept going. "I heard you on the patio. You said once you had power of attorney it'd be easy to sell her house, and there's a senior community in Galveston, and the difference would cover the margin call." He looked at me then, and his eyes were full. "I didn't know what a margin call was. I looked it up. Grandma, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know if it was real." Margin call. So that was the engine under all of it. My son-in-law, who makes $170,000 a year, who could not pay a single bill of his own. And I know some of you have been wondering how that math works, because I wondered too for years. Here is how it works. It doesn't. The truck, the club, the trips, those were the visible spending. Underneath, he'd been trading on borrowed money. Options, leverage, words I've since learned the way you learn the names of diseases, and the market had turned, and the brokerage wanted its money, and the gap between his salary and his life had gotten so wide that the only thing big enough to fill it was a 71-year-old widow's paid-off house. My daughter stood up off my couch like the cushion had caught fire. She looked at her husband for a long, long moment, and then she crossed the room and stood next to her son. "I'd like to tell you my son-in-law broke down. He didn't. Men like him don't break in living rooms. They break in private, later or never. What he did was leave stiff-backed, muttering about lawyers of his own. and the storm door clapped shut behind him, and the truck I co-signed for backed out of my driveway, and the three of us who were left stood in my living room in the ringing quiet. My daughter cried then, hard the way she cried at her daddy's funeral, and I will be honest with you because I promised honesty. I did not rush to hold her. I stood there and let her cry for a minute first, because some part of me needed to know whether she was crying for me or for herself. And the truth is, it was probably both, because people are both. When I did put my arms around her, I said the only thing I had, "I love you," and the answer is still no. She pulled back and looked at me, mascara everywhere, confused. "The accounts stay closed," I said. "The will stays changed. The affidavit stays filed, and what happens to your husband with the bank depends on your husband, not on me. I am done buying peace in this family. Peace I have to buy isn't peace, it's a subscription." She didn't argue. That surprised me. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, the exact gesture she made at 6 years old, and she said, "I kept telling myself you didn't mind. You always said yes, so I let myself believe yes was free." She looked around my living room, the worn arm of Roy's old chair, the thermostat I keep at 78 in summer to save on the bill, all the small economies of my life that had funded the large luxuries of hers, sitting right there in plain sight all along. It was never free, was it? "No, baby," I said. "It was everything I had." They stayed for an hour. Nobody fixed anything. An hour doesn't fix 16 years. But my grandson sat next to me on the couch with his shoulder against mine the whole time, solid as a fence post, and when they left, my daughter stopped on the porch and said, "I'm taking him to my sister-in-law's tonight. I have to figure out what I'm doing." Then she said, "Happy birthday, Mama. The real kind. I'm sorry it's 3 days late." It's been 7 months now. I'll tell you where things stand, because endings in real life are not bows, they're ledgers. The bank completed its investigation. Because I'd filed the affidavit, the loan application is dead and my house is mine, fully, with alerts on the title that ping my phone if anyone so much as breathes on the deed. The matter of consequences for my son-in-law sits with people whose job that is. I was told my part is done, and I have let my part be done. My daughter filed for legal separation in February. She moved into an apartment off Jones Road with my grandson, and she is working full-time for the first time in a decade. And some weeks, she is angry at me in that sideways way people get angry at the person who turned the lights on. We have lunch every other Sunday anyway. We are rebuilding something, slowly, smaller than what we had, and more real, the way a bone heals back thicker at the brick. She has never once asked me for money. I notice that the way you notice pain stopping. My grandson comes over on Wednesdays. I pay for his hockey again, and before anybody says anything, hear me, I pay for it directly to the rink, in his name, because it was never the giving that broke me. I'd give that boy the moon. It was being harvested. There is a difference, and it took me until 71 to learn the vocabulary for it. And if you take nothing else from an old nurse in Houston, take this: generosity is something you hand to someone. It is not something they reach in and take while you hold still. Last month, on a Wednesday, my grandson was doing homework at my kitchen table. The good china put away, just 2 regular plates with pound cake on them, and he looked up and said, "Grandma, were you scared that day at the bank?" I thought about it honestly, because he'd earned honesty. I was scared every day for 16 years, I told him. That day was the first morning I wasn't. I used to believe that love meant absorbing things, that a mother is a kind of foundation, and a foundation's whole job is to be stood on and never make a sound. I believed boundaries were something cold people had, and that if I just gave enough, smoothly enough, quietly enough, the people I loved would someday turn around and see me. But here is what those years actually taught the people at my table. They taught them I came free. We train people with our silence in exactly how to treat us, and then we are heartbroken when they learn the lesson well. I am not heartbroken anymore. Some mornings I sit on my porch with my coffee while the street wakes up, the school bus sighing at the corner, somebody's sprinkler ticking around, and I feel the strangest lightness, like I set down a suitcase I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped counting it as weight. My name is back on my own life. It turns out that was the only signature that ever really mattered. Dignity, I've decided, isn't something other people take from you. It leaves in pieces with your permission every time you stay quiet to keep a peace that was never really peace. And it comes back the same way it left, one no at a time, one unanswered knock, one plastic plate set down for the last time. If you've ever sat at the far end of your own family's table and felt yourself going invisible, I want you to hear this from a woman who waited 71 years. You are allowed to matter to yourself first. It is not selfish, it is the repair. Before you go, tell me, what lesson did you take from this story? And which city are you listening from tonight? I read every comment, and I'd love to know you're out there. I keep coming back to that plastic plate, not because of what it was, but because of what it proved. Nothing in that house happened by accident. The folding chair, the empty card, the cake with the wrong name, none of it fell out of the sky. It grew, season by season, out of seeds I helped plant. Every time I paid a bill and swallowed my hurt, I taught my family that my yes cost nothing. Every silence bought a little more silence. That's the plain arithmetic of it. My son-in-law didn't wake up one day, a man who forges a signature on a loan against a widow's house. He got there one unchallenged liberty at a time, and I held the door. And his side of the ledger worked the same way. The truck, the club, the borrowed money stacked on borrowed money. A man can outrun his own arithmetic for a while, but the bill always finds the address. When his cards died at that steakhouse, that wasn't bad luck. That was 16 years of consequences arriving all at once, the way water arrives when a dam finally gives. What saved me wasn't anger. I've thought hard about this. It was 3 old-fashioned things I'd had all along and simply stopped using on my own behalf. The first was plain decency, the kind that refuses to lie, even kindly, even to keep a holiday peaceful. The night I stopped pretending the plate didn't matter was the night the truth got room to breathe. The second was a clear head. I didn't storm anybody's porch. I sat at my kitchen table with a folder and an envelope, and I did the math, because feelings told me something was wrong, but the numbers told me what exactly. Wisdom isn't being smart, it's being willing to look straight at a thing you'd rather not see. And the third was grit, the quiet, unglamorous kind. Standing 3 feet from my own daughter while she knocked, and not opening that door took more out of me than any double shift ever did. Saying the answer is still no to a crying child you'd die for, and meaning it, and saying it again the next week, that's not hardness, that's a muscle, and it only grows one painful repetition at a time. I notice my grandson had all 3 before I did. He told the truth in a room full of grown men. He looked up a word he didn't know instead of looking away, and his voice shook, but he kept talking. 15 years old. If a boy can do it, a 71-year-old nurse had no excuse. So here's what I know now, sitting on my porch with my coffee and my own name, back on my own life. What you permit, you teach. What you teach, you will be served at your own table, on whatever plate they think you've accepted. Live honest. Think clearly, and hold the line even when your hands shake. The peace you buy with silence is rented. The peace you build with truth is yours, and nobody can call that loan.